Hello. In this video, I want to follow on with the forecasting and show you how you would calculate, based on certain assumptions, the value of your project as it is currently set up. Ordinarily, if you're doing this, we've already had discussions related to time value of money, present value of cash flows, future value of cash flows, and literally what we will be doing here is calculating the present value of all of your operating cash flows plus the terminal value, summing all that together, and that represents what your project is worth. And we'll talk about that just a little bit at the end as well. So the first thing we need to do in order to do this calculation is we need a weighted average cost of capital. For purposes of the step that you're in right now, you won't know what that number is. And so what you need to do is to pick a number that is in the ballpark of what yours likely will be. In the ballpark could be off by 20% either way. Quite frankly, it's more about getting something in there and understanding how the model fits together and how different variables affect the value of the model. So for our purposes, I'm going to tell you to use 15% as your weighted average cost of capital, and that's an assumption, so we're going to highlight that. And an important thing is that whatever your weighted average cost of capital is, that's also what you should have been using for calculating your terminal value, and in this case it was. But rather than have to plug that value in twice, we're now just going to set that equal to this weighted average cost of capital. And because it's driven by that, that's no longer a formula, or a hard code value, it's a formula, so I can get rid of that assumption. Next thing we need to do is to figure out the discounting periods. How many periods into the future does the cash flow happen, so that we can figure out how many periods to discount back for. The early stuff, we're just going to assume that's happening today, so it has a discount factor, discount period of 0. Every month for the monthly is going to be equal to the prior month plus 1/12 of a year, because a period is a year in our case. So you can just add those on, and we'll drag that out to month 12. Okay, and again, that's all formula driven, and that's really not an assumption, that's a fact in this case, so we don't have to highlight those in yellow. And then from month 12 forward, we're adding a year, so it'll be whatever the prior period was plus a period, and we drag that on out all the way out to year 10, and now we have the actual years. So we have years and parts of a year that are how far into the future, once we open the doors, that we're going to see the cash flows associated with each month. And so then we need our discount factor, and this is sort of a simple, transparent way for people to look and understand what you're doing in terms of the discounting. And so if you think about present value, you would take your value and you would divide it by 1 plus your discount rate raised to the power of however many periods. Well, if you extrapolate out and you sort of just put the cash flow as one item and the factor as another item, it becomes 1 over 1 plus the discount rate. So that's what we're doing as our formula. And I just need to lock in that discount rate, so when I drag this, it doesn't matter. Raised to the number of periods that we're discounting it. And so now I have this sort of freestanding factor that I can look at and make sure it makes sense, right? And so it should be getting smaller over time to reflect the fact that the further out in time you go, the less valuable a cash flow that happens further into the future is in terms of today's dollars. And you can see that at this discount rate, a cash flow that we get in year 10 is only worth 25% roughly of what it would be worth today. Now, obviously, if we wanted to, if we found that our weighted average cost of capital was different, say it was only 10%, we change that. That's a pretty big impact. You go from being worth 25 cents on the dollar to being worth almost 39 cents on the dollar. That could change the value of your project a lot. So because we've broken this out separately, you can see that the way that the weighted average cost of capital impacts the value of your project is through this discount factor. Now that we've got that, it's really just a simple case of going and grabbing our operating cash flows and multiplying them by your factor. Okay, and so obviously that one's multiplied by 1, meaning cash flows that happen on day 1 are worth the same value as cash flows that happen on day 1. This one, our cash flows were 1818. They happen a month later, so they're only worth $17.97. You didn't lose a lot. You lost $21 in value there, but you're just going to continue on with that all the way out. Okay. And so we have the value of each of the cash flows that we've forecast all the way out for 10 years. And if we wanted to know what the total value of all of those cash flows are, so think about it this way. For example, if I go out here to, let's just go grab year 2. The cash flow was $365,000 basically, but it doesn't happen until 2 years from now. And so in today's dollars, it's only worth $275,794. Okay. Well, so I could take each of those cash flows and figure out what it's worth today. And then I could sum all of the values of what things are worth today. And that becomes what the value of them all together is worth today. And equals the sum of all those. And that would tell us what the present value of all of our operating cash flows are out to year 10. Okay, that's $452,500. Not bad. And again, you can see if we were to lower our weighted average cost of capital, that bumps up pretty good. That goes up from 450 to 880. If we went to a 20% weighted average cost of capital, it drops down pretty good. Kind of reflects the fact that a lot of our cash flows are happening later out. We got this one really big cash flow early on and the rest of it's later out. Now what's not included in that is, remember, we have this terminal value that represents all the cash flows after year 10. And it is stated in terms of what it's worth in year 10, right? And so what we want to do is, I'm going to drag this down just a little bit. We want the 10-year discount factor, because that's what we want to multiply the terminal value by. So we'll call that is equal, and I'll just go grab the 10-year discounting factor. Okay, and so that is what I'm using in order to basically get back to today dollars on the terminal value. So I can just do the terminal value, which we said was $3.18 million, times this factor, $787,767. Okay, so if I'm adding the present value of all the stuff up to 10 years here, plus the present value of all the stuff 10 years and beyond here, I just add those two together, all right, and that becomes the value of the project. And I'm going to hit that with a little blue highlighting because it's an important number. Now, what do I mean it's the value of the project? What I mean is completely separate from the idea of how you're going to raise the money to be able to do that to handle that initial cash flow of about 1.3 million, this amount right here, right? Somebody, if you wanted to turn the idea and all the work that you've done over to them and let them execute it, they should not only be responsible for finding all of that, but they should be willing to pay you an additional $1,240,000 roughly for the fact that you kind of identified this opportunity and put it together. And if they paid you that amount, they would be basically saying they are happy with a 15% return on their investment. Okay, so they would be paying the 1.2 million and getting 15% on average per year return on the 1.24 million. Okay, it doesn't talk about where the 1.3 million over here is going to come from. That might come from them, in which case they could negotiate something different for that. It could come from debt financing. Doesn't speak to that specifically right now. But at the end of the day, if you said to somebody, I've got a business. I had to go raise the money, and let's say the cost of the money that I raised was 15%. What's the value of the business to me today after I've taken care of all the payments, the costs, and everything, and paid back my investors? Right? It's worth $1.2 million to me today. So that's kind of what that means. Anyway, hope that's useful to you. It's a really simple, straightforward, I think, applied way of seeing how we use present value in the real world. And I just want you to walk away. I know people in the past have heard the term present value and they're like, it's just a number. I don't know what it means. I hope you walk away from this understanding present value of something means what somebody should be willing to pay you today for that something, or what you should be willing to pay to get it from somebody else. All right. Well, thank you guys. And again, if you aren't sure what we're doing here, or you have questions, please bring them to class. Thanks. What'd that do? I'm not sure. There we go.